Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting guest on the podcast, like we always have. We are talking to the Socialist Party of New Hampshire, and they're going to talk to us about exciting things they do to make this world better. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Let us get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch, and if you give our audience your name.
Absolutely. My name is Aaron Smith-Walter, and I've been a member of the Socialist Party since 2009. Initially,
Wow.
I joined the party, it doesn't seem like that long ago to me, but when I think about it, it's like, oh, yeah, that was a while ago. I initially joined when I was living in Virginia at the Central Virginia local that existed there at the time. But currently, I'm the outreach secretary for the Socialist Party of Southern New Hampshire.
Okay.
And personally, I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. I grew up in Virginia. I've been involved in left-wing politics ever since I was 16 years old. When I joined the Communist Party from my basement in the early days of the internet when they allowed that kind of thing to go on. And I've just been working in various organizations and capacities ever since. And my current political home is here in Socialist Party. So I'm super excited to do this and talk to folks.
Excellent. So what caused you to go from, because you say you were in the Communist Party, what caused you to move over to the Socialist Party?
A lot of times it basically sort of revolved around who was active in the area. So,
Okay.
When I was in university at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, right there in the Shenandoah Valley, we had a chapter, the youth chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. So I was a member of that organization from like 1998 up until 2005. So it's basically where you find people who are doing good work, who share your understanding of the current political situation that we find ourselves in, and who kind of share the values of making sure that we turn the immense productive apparatus that capitalism has bequeathed us, right, to meeting human needs and not stuffing corporate coffers. I think is really how I wound up where I am right now is the answer to that question. Okay,
so the last thing you said, would you say that would be a fair description of how you define socialism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that socialism has a couple of different components, but for me, it's really about two substantial plans, right? One is obviously the democratic control of the economy. And that control should be exercised by the people who are engaged in the production of wealth itself. So when we think about what socialism is, it really, in my mind, prioritizes the opinions of the people who are doing the work. So to the extent that you can democratize the economy and make sure that the productive apparatus is being employed to meet the needs of the people who are powering said economy, that's in my mind a pretty a useful working definition of socialism, at least when we're talking about engaging in sort of a broad-based party building endeavor.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned your role with the party. You said outreach director, right?
Yeah, currently I am the outreach secretary, so I handle a lot of the business that we have of trying to elevate the visibility of the party in the area, coordinating activities with other organizations, because, as you know, and I'm assuming that the listeners to your show will know, the left has a vast array of articulations and organizations. And so, finding ways to work together on joint projects there is absolutely essential. And that does also animate one of the, I think, important features of the Socialist Party and how we sort of organize here in New Hampshire, and that is sort of an equal emphasis on both the importance of electoral politics, but also the focus on dual power and the recognition that the working class needs to really create its own institutions in order to make sure that the needs of the working class are met in both the immediate term and also the long term.
Okay, can you define working class for our audience? Some people have different views of it. Some people, PSL did a podcast about that where what I've noticed too is a lot of people think working class means you are in overalls, but
Right.
socialism has a more in-depth view of the working class. So kindly define that for our audience.
Absolutely. I mean, just all my cards on the table. I currently work in what might be described as one of the most bourgeois occupations there is. I'm a university professor, and so there's a lot of people who would say that you're not working class, and I would take issue with that in the sense that I define working class myself pretty broadly, and it's basically a situation where you make your living in this economy by selling your labor, right? And your labor can be your muscles, right? It can be your knowledge. It can be your talent. If it's sold as a commodity on a market, right, then you are a member of the working class. And so I think that that's sort of the definition I use. It does kind of get a little bit more complicated when you start talking about, what about workers who, own their own businesses, right? But they're their own employee, right? These are particular sort of niche questions. But broadly speaking, if you are forced to go to a job every day in order to make sure that you can eat and clothe and house yourself, I consider you a member of the working class until you prove me wrong, until you prove differently, I guess.
Okay, that's a good way to summarize that. It makes sense. So kindly tell our audience some of the major points of your area's platform, specifically in your area in New Hampshire. Earlier you defined socialism. Kindly tell us how that works out in given issues that are relevant in your area.
Absolutely. So currently, our local program is articulated along 7 primary planks.
Okay.
And so the first of those, we have the issue of housing. Here in New Hampshire, I believe they've just released a report that says we're, needing a minimum of 20,000 new units of housing to keep up with demand. And, New Hampshire isn't even the most dysfunctional housing market in the country. We've seen, of course, and I think that most people have seen, the insane growth in the homeless population in the country. We have seen the insane growth of the inflation in home values. I think 2 years ago, the average American house made more money value-wise than the average American worker, right? So we see that there is a need for us to refocus on housing as a human right and a move away from housing as this idea of an investment vehicle, right? We currently have, I think, something like 12 million homes which are held as Airbnbs or second homes, right, that serve as this vast reserve of housing which goes unoccupied the majority of the time, all in parallel with an explosion in the homeless population and an explosion in the number of young people who are unable to afford their own homes. And so we have, as one of our focus here in the local, mobilization and issues around how do we make housing do what it's supposed to do, which is basically provide shelter for people. We also have a focus on Medicare for all as a policy plank, right? Much for the same reason, right? Our entire medical system, right, is not geared toward health care. It's actually geared toward denying people health care, right? We've enshrined insurance companies who only profit if they don't provide health care services. And so we know that the only way that we're going to actually achieve the promise of modern medicine is through the complete and utter dissolving of these for-profit insurance companies, which serve only to prevent people from actually accessing their health care. And we also have to make sure that we decouple access to health care and the provision of health care itself from the employer, right? That this should be a social right which all Americans are entitled to just by virtue of their being here in the country. The third plank that we have is an end to the drug war. This has to happen in our mind immediately. We see the damage that it's done to our communities, and we see how the investment in institutions of the carceral state, right, are being made over and over again as a policy of choice, much to the impoverishment of needed substance abuse programs for medical and health-related intervention. So we see that in order for people to get the actual care that they need, we have to end the war on drugs. And this is also coupled with the need for us to release all the nonviolent drug offenders. One of the things that we often see, I know this has happened in Virginia, I think it's happened in Massachusetts and also maybe even Alaska as well, is the move toward the legalization of marijuana is not accompanied with necessarily the commuting of the sentences for those individuals who were prosecuted when the drugs were illegal. And so we have a disproportionately unfair punishment regime that needs to be addressed. We also support the universal right for citizens to possess guns. The right to defend yourself is essential, absolutely, for freedom in our view. And to abridge that right, we kind of think is going to result in a very negative negative thing. The state is unlikely to relinquish their right to weapons, and this is something that we feel strongly that shouldn't be done. We also believe that we should establish a $25 per hour minimum wage, and that we should peg that wage to inflation for annual increases. Here in New Hampshire, we have the, shall we say, notorious sort of a problem of our state minimum wage is still pegged to the federal minimum wage, so it's $7.25 an hour, which anyone will tell you is completely inadequate in any respect to meeting your daily or weekly or monthly household needs. We also support universal child care. One of the major issues that we have in the state is that child care is far too expensive, and that this leads to many people who are unable to work. It also leads to children being left in unsafe situations. And if we're wanting to talk about a truly emancipatory social system, we have to be able to provide parents the ability to rely on affordable and universal health child care programs so that they can go and engage in the endeavors that they are interested in without worrying about their children at home in that respect. And then the last sort of plank that we're really focused on is, all of these programs are going to cost money, and so we need to basically look to pay for this somehow, and the deconstruction of the American imperial military apparatus is the big glaring red light where we can take resources, which we are currently using, to basically spread murder machines across the planet. We need to bring our troops home, and we need to close those bases and rededicate the resources of this country toward meeting the needs of the people who live here, and not on spreading oppression across the planet. And so those are like the big 7 things that we're kind of focused on here in New Hampshire. So it's a large list, but there you go.
Interesting. I don't hear it every day from the left about gun rights. Usually you think of gun rights as a conservative thing.
Yeah, we do normally get that, and what we like to say here in the chapter is you go far enough left and you get your gun rights back. And I think that one of the major sort of misperceptions, at least I would argue it's a misperception, is that the United States has as much violence and shootings as it has because we have as many guns as we do. And I think that certainly that's a factor. But we also have an incredibly violent society culturally. We also have an incredibly, shall we say, stingy welfare state. We have a social structure whereby losing in any sort of sense is incredibly catastrophic. And I think that what we need to understand is that we have a substantial inability to ever get rid of the guns that we have, I think. If you look at the number of guns in America right now, in the United States, we have more guns than we have people. And we lack the ability to do something as simple as take a look at COVID, right? We wanted to send people checks to assist them, right? It was certainly a small amount of money, right? A drop
Yep.
in the bucket. But we lacked the administrative infrastructure to even do that. And to suggest that there's going to be some ability for us to remove all guns from society, I think, is a statement of policy which doesn't recognize that this is something that we lack the capacity to do. And I would also suggest that it doesn't solve the problem. Right? The overall problem is one of violence, of degradation of the individual, of the sort of instrumentalization of others, right? Which is what capitalism teaches us, that we can use others for our own ends, right? And that they don't need to be respected in the same way that we respect ourselves, right? And so I would argue that these things are inextricably linked. And when we think about what we should be doing with guns, certainly some regulation is acceptable, but to talk about, deciding who's going to get what gun, it becomes overly complex and problematic, especially when there are a great many other issues that we should really be focusing on if we're interested in reducing harm to our society.
Sure. Do you feel all labor unions are the same? One reason I ask this is because of my personal experience. I was organizing my workplace, and I got involved in a couple of labor unions, and they were not helpful at all. And I was also a member of a labor union at one job where one woman who was our representative hadn't worked in the field for 7 years. And then later I got involved in IWW, and the IWW is very democratic in how they do that. They say if you're in the position, you have to be the same. So do you believe all labor unions are the same, or would you not want to comment on that because you might think it alienates some unions, or do you think we shouldn't hold unions up we should be able to criticize unions when they're not serving what they say they serve?
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that we should criticize institutions which are failing to uphold values that we would promote, right? So if your union is a union which is not democratic. If your union is only interested in serving the needs of its own members to the exclusion of outreach to other workers, right, who may be struggling to organize. It's not to say that your union is useless, right? It's just that there's room for improvement, and
Sure.
improvement only comes in response to criticism. So I really think that, in the United States, we have had the history of immense pressure against labor. We've lived through that. It's currently going on. And so the fight to build these unions is important, but also the fight that once you have one, to democratize, to render it more responsive is also a fight that's worth undertaking. And so I think that to answer your question, criticism of unions in the pursuit of improving them is something which is likely to be necessary, because just as all families are different, right? all unions might be different. Some of them might be better than others in the way that they're structured, and
Yes.
so we just want to be sure that they are serving as vehicles for worker empowerment and liberation, and not merely as capital's junior partner.
Sure. Makes sense. Along the same lines, how do you approach feminism? Because obviously most people are going to say they support feminism because it's equality, but there's some forms of feminism that you might call bourgeois feminism, where I see people, for example, is talking about women that are high up on the social ladder. They say they complain about how somebody confuses them with the secretary. So it seems like that type is snobbery. It's not feminism. So how do you approach the issue of feminism with the class perspective while avoiding this type of feminism?
Yeah, I think that feminism and women's liberation, right, is if you go to the Socialist Party USA website under our strategy section, this is the first thing that comes up, right? As Ingalls talked about, the first oppression was patriarchal oppression, and so there is a lot of value. There's a lot of emphasis that we place on this. The exact question that I think you're getting at is, how do we think about squaring the circle between what we might want to think of as a liberal feminism, right? This
Yes.
idea that women should go out and they should be just as free as men or other individuals to occupy positions of exploitation and oppression in
Exactly.
the existing superstructure. My I guess response to that would be that anyone who occupies those positions, right, are engaging in exploitation and oppression of the working classes. And so, to the extent that we would respect and fight for the liberation of all women, I certainly do not believe that we would endorse the ability or the move of women to then use the existing patriarchal power structure to oppress the working class. And so it does become a tactical question when we talk about individual sort of issues. But on the whole, I would suspect that we would oppose any gendered oppression, but we certainly would not endorse women using the existing exploitative infrastructure to extract value from the working class and continue their exploitation.
Makes sense. So Holly Hawkins said on one of his podcasts that North Korea is a repressive regime, yet some people on the left support North Korea. So if you're comfortable answering that question, kindly explain how you see that from the Socialist Party perspective.
I think from my perspective, what I'm really most interested in is critiquing my own society.
Okay.
That what we have have is a situation where the overall weaknesses of societies which choose to call themselves socialist is certainly a question. But I don't know that there's necessarily a great deal of value in those of us who are sitting in the United States spending a huge amount of time trying to decide whether or not one particular country or one particular country at a particular historical time was or was not socialist or repressive or, fill in the blank. Certainly, I think that we have, violations that every state commits against its citizens. That just it's part of the nature of states, right, where injustice happens. But it's also part of the nature of the reason why it's important to have popular organizations and struggle. And one of the reasons that the Socialist Party of Southern New Hampshire really pushes this notion of dual power, right, that we have, at least in the United States, the nation that I'm most familiar with, the state is captured, right, by the interest of capital. The ruling class, right, commands the state. You can look at, great work done by Martin Gillis, right? Affluence and Influence is the name of the book, and he basically did a study of policy outcomes, and he arrived at the conclusion that unless you're rich, it doesn't matter what you want in the United States, right? That the people who get what they want are the people who actually pay for the parties, right? That's the way that this works. And so when we think about what is the point, right, of socialist organizing and socialist strategy, from the party perspective here at the SP in Southern New Hampshire, we want a party that is owned by the working class, right? That if you don't have the money, you can participate, right? You can show up, you can give your labor, you can give your time, and that the party is going to then represent, right, and advance your interest in public policy. That is what the goal of the electoral campaign is. But there's also a recognition that there is a deep, right, a bias in the existing electoral system toward the Democratic and Republican parties. You can just look at state ballot access laws to understand this, right?
Yes.
Obstacles are erected to third-party political organizations to make it more costly for them, to make it harder for them to participate, and make it easier for the two establishment parties to continue, right, serving the interest of capital, which is exactly what they do. The best study of this, you can look at Ferguson's book, The Golden Rule. It basically traces the evolution of support and development of the two political parties over time in response to industrial shifts between domestic and international resource flows. And so what I think we want to really impress upon people is that the building of institutions that are going to meet people's needs now, right, is essential. And that's really where, partnering with other organizations, be they housing organizations, tenants unions, if they're cooperatives when it comes to child care provision, these are all things that people can do, workers can do for themselves and their communities to meet the fact that the current manifestation of the U.S. state seems to be either one, incapable, or two, unwilling to meet the needs of its population in many serious ways, right? We have higher education, which is incredibly expensive and outside the reach of many of our citizens. We have health care, which is the same, expensive and outside the reach, right? You have to basically be at death's door until they require the emergency room to stabilize you, right? If you want to look at where people lose their money, right? Huge numbers of Americans go bankrupt every year because of medical claims. Like, our mental health care system is woefully inadequate for meeting the needs that we have. We can't address climate change. Our infrastructure is crumbling. All of these things really speak to a state which has abandoned its commitment to improving the lives of the people that it is purportedly in existence to serve. And so the two two-strand solution that we have is, one, immediately work with institutions, individuals, organizations, right, at the community level to respond to the current needs, right? So that's our response to harm reduction, not vote Democrat. Voting Democrat doesn't result in harm reduction, right? What we want is immediate application of the efforts of the working class to address their own needs. The second, of course, is the electoral approach, because we recognize that neither of the two mainstream parties have any interest in actually serving any of the individuals other than the donors that pay for their continued existence. So that's our overall approach to the current political situation that we find ourselves in here in New Hampshire.
All right. Sounds good. So how can our listeners support your party?
That's great. Yeah, we'd love to have it if they happen to be here in New Hampshire. We would love it if you would come out to some of our events, get in touch with us. I do have the information on our social media. I don't know if it's best to give that to you now. It's Socialist Party SNH.net. I can send that to you if it be something that you would put in the notes for the episode.
Okay.
You can also find us on Facebook. We are there as well. The other thing that you can do is, if you're not in New Hampshire, the Socialist Party is a national party in the United States. You can contact the national organizer, and they can get you information for organizing your own chapter or getting in touch with people in your area who are interested in organizing a chapter. And so those would be two ways that you could get involved. And then sort of from a larger sort of perspective is that, if you don't have any of these organizations and you don't necessarily have the time to organize a Socialist Party local of your own, just getting involved in some of these organizations that are out there in your community that are interested in addressing some of these issues around getting folks medical care, housing security, anti-militarism. These are all useful things that can be done, which in the long term are really going to serve the achievement of the ideals and the values that those of us in the Socialist Party of New Hampshire kind of hold. So I guess that'd be my answer.
Yes, that's good. That's helpful. Aaron, we thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking about all the exciting things your party is doing.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been great talking with you.
All right. We wish you all the best in your party and also in your personal and professional endeavors.
Thank you very much. You too. Take care.
Take care. Bye now.